Ole Miss is the clear number 3 team in the SEC, and it's unfair to everybody involved to say anything other than that. And it's time that the SEC throws their weight around for Ole Miss instead of against Ole Miss. This is the Locked On Ole Miss podcast.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi, I'm Stephen Willis, and I am likely the only person that you're going to hear from today that has had an office in the Manning Center at Ole Miss and worked in the national media for Yahoo Sports. Thank you very much for joining us. Today on the show, we are going to talk about the weekend that was in college football. That was a really awesome rivalry weekend, and why Ole Miss is the clear number 3 program in the SEC and deserves that conference help that other teams get from time to time. Everydayers know how I view this Ole Miss team and how they deserve the recognition that comes with an NY6 bid. As I mentioned, I'm Stephen Willis, and this is the Locked On Ole Miss podcast, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. We're free and available on all podcast apps and YouTube. Thanks for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen every day, and a special hello to the everydayers that make the show what it is. Just want to let you know, download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. So, Ole Miss went down, won the Egg Bowl. It turned out to be a harder fought Egg Bowl than I assumed it was going to be, and I'm probably 4 days past it right now, so my thoughts are kind of together. One thing that's interesting to me is that Ole Miss has won in Starkville 4 out of the last 5 times. They've won 3 out of the last 4 overall. And I think people need to understand that 3 out of 4, lots of coaches in Ole Miss history have gone 3 out of 4. Okay? That's kind of a common benchmark. That's on the end of normal to go 3 out of 4 in a series. But once you get to 4 out of 5 and move beyond that, you get into special territory that's been reserved for like Johnny Vaught and Billy Brewer and coaches like that. So burying Mississippi State still on the table. And it looks like Mississippi State's about to make a coaching change and take in Jeff Levy. And they're basically trying to do whatever they can to stunt the growth of Ole Miss. And that's not it. I mean, I like Jeff Levy a lot. He's a good offensive coordinator, but you just got rid of a coach that was a good defensive coordinator. And you have to, it's hilarious kind of move. But anyway, I digress. Ole Miss is clearly the number 3 team in the Southeastern Conference. And Ole Miss has a win on the road against 11-1 Tulane. That's a top 20 ranked potential conference champion, Tulane. Okay. They have a win over LSU at home, a 9-3 LSU team. Those are better wins than Missouri or anybody else can even dream of having. Missouri's best win is against Tennessee. Their best win has 8 wins on the season. Their best win of the season is an 8-win program. You know how many 8-win programs there are? They didn't beat anybody that is good. Ole Miss has played 3 teams that is likely going to end up in the NY6, and they're 1-2 against them. Granted, the Georgia game didn't go the way we expected, but when Brock Bowers and those dudes play, that's a different animal than you get when they don't. Against Alabama, the second half play calling just didn't work out right, but Ole Miss did not have healthy ball players. If Trey Harris plays in that game, that is a different ball game. Ole Miss is clearly the 3rd best team in the Southeastern Conference. It's not close. If you just look at the resume, Ole Miss is the 3rd best team. Ole Miss has played the 5th hardest schedule in the country and went 10-2 against it. They've lost 2 games at Alabama and at Georgia. Both of those teams' combined record right now, 23-1. They beat 11-1 Tulane. They were Tulane's only loss in New Orleans. We went on the road to a group of 5 team, handled business. Played LSU a couple weeks later, beat the Bayou Bengals, something that Missouri had that opportunity to do as well, and they simply could not. Even as bad as that LSU defense is, they just couldn't score enough to get it done. Ole Miss is clearly the number 3 team in the Southeastern Conference, and they deserve to be treated that way. They deserve for Greg Sankey in the SEC office to say, no. This is the team that we need to figure out a way to get in. This is the team that we don't need to screw over, because this is clearly the 3rd best team in the SEC this year. Now, Missouri's had a good season. They're 10-2. It's not necessarily their fault that the SEC East was garbage outside of Georgia. It's not their fault that their crossover games involved Arkansas, who was garbage. And the other crossover game was LSU, which was their opportunity to make some hay. And they weren't able to do it. That is not their fault. And in a normal circumstances where I think narratives aren't the thing that's going on, Missouri probably gets the 4th bid in the NY6. And they probably deserve it. But if you want to do head-to-head with Ole Miss and Missouri can't compete. Missouri's best win is a loss. And this weekend, Georgia Tech actually lost to Georgia by less than Missouri, and Ole Miss beat Georgia Tech by 20 points. Head-to-head, every metric of real things, wins and losses, stuff that actually matters, Ole Miss has a more impressive resume. It's been all eye test up until this point, but we've gotten to the point of the season, and we're going to talk about the week games that we paid attention to. Kansas State, which was one of Missouri's ranked wins, lost. They're going to fall out of the college football playoff poll. That's going to leave Tennessee at like 23 as their best win. Ole Miss has 2 wins ranked higher than that, and their 2 losses are going to be in like the top 7 in the country. So I just don't want to hear it. I just don't. I get that Mizzou is proud of what they did. They don't need to have that argument because it's just not there. There's not any there for Mizzou other than the fact that, well, if you look at our eye test, we're in the Georgia game in the 4th quarter without Brock Bowers and Mims, and I think that should stand more than the LSU game that we lost to. Yeah, that's our rule. That makes sense to me. And it's just a stupid freaking argument. Because if you look at this team's record, all 12 games, because the whole body of work has to matter. That's what we hear every time this college football playoff meets. The whole body of work has to matter. You look at this thing, it's going to look for Ole Miss W's all the way down and against ranked teams. Ole Miss beat better teams. Ole Miss lost to better teams. And whenever those are the evenly matched teams in question, Ole Miss is deserving of the bid. Everybody knows that. If Ole Miss does not get it, A, it's a failure of the Southeastern Conference, and B, it's the proof that a narrative from the national media and not wanting to put 4 SEC teams in the New Year's Six in a year when in the early parts of September, their narrative was established that the SEC was down. I mean, that's the whole problem with this. Missouri has a good team. Like I said, Missouri probably belongs in there. But if it's a beauty pageant between Ole Miss and Missouri, Missouri does not deserve to go over Ole Miss. There's no world where you can make that make sense. That world doesn't exist. But they're going to struggle. It's like, well, if we set the SECs down and we did that all year and 4 SEC teams get into the NY6, what does that mean? Well, that means you don't know what the freak you're talking about. That's what that means. And that people that put overly stock into people like me or the media or anything like that you kind of get what you deserve a little bit. Because in my opinion, you look at the resumes, it's clear. There's 3 teams in the SEC, okay? 3 teams that are top tier teams. Ole Miss lost to both of them. But if you look at there's like, what's the best teams in the SEC? It would be Georgia, Alabama, and then Ole Miss might get mentioned. That's it. And then Missouri and LSU would be put in the same bucket. And that's kind of how we need to view how this is going to go as well. That's just my opinion on that one. Anyway, I do want to let you know, thanks again for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen of the day. We're just getting started. We look at the two games that affected Ole Miss the most this weekend because there was some good news this weekend. There also was a little bit of bad news as well. We'll talk about that when we come back. But I do want to let you know right now, you shouldn't have to worry when you're buying tickets to your next big event. Easy to find and buy tickets for every kind of event in your area can be done with the GameTime app. They have views from all the seats in your venue. GameTime is the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. See the view from your seat before you buy so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. They have all-in prices that can show your total up front so you know exactly what you're getting in a great deal without all those hidden fees. Buy tickets in seconds with 2 taps. They're obsessed with finding ways to help save you money on these tickets. You can find exclusive flash deals and sponsored deals on tickets for football, basketball, baseball, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. With zone deals, that's a really cool thing. You pick the section and GameTime picks the seats for an average of 18% savings. And the GameTime guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find the same tickets or the same row for the same or more money or less money or less, GameTime will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download GameTime today. It's got last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Also, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you today. 24/7 covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every single league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. All right, now there's one team that Ole Miss was having to potentially deal with they're kind of fraudulent. They haven't played anybody. They haven't lost to like 3-9 Pittsburgh. But that's Louisville. And Louisville has a chance to be all right, but they're the team that's going to go into the New Year's Six if they get there and get boat raced by somebody. That's just going to happen. But in the game over the weekend, Kentucky was able to pull out a big upset. And then you have all the drama with Mark Stoops and how he's actually staying in Kentucky, and A&M's in the middle of completely A&Ming their search. But Kentucky winning that game made it interesting because what that means is if Florida State does not make the playoffs, basically Ole Miss makes the NY6. That is how that is going to work. Now, the problem is going to be if Louisville beats FSU in the ACC championship game, that is going to make it to where Louisville gets back in and that's off the table again. If Florida State makes the playoff, the Orange Bowl is obligated to take Louisville as an ACC team to go to that game. So this is going to be a difficult situation because after Florida, which got off to a fantastic start during Rivalry week, kind of folded down the stretch. Florida State took control of that game, won it. Florida State's going to come in probably at 5th, maybe 4th in the playoff rankings after this week. I'm not sure what they're going to do. They might set it up to where they have Oregon jump them, and then you have Washington. So it's like a 3-4 play-in game with Florida State at 5th. And maybe I think Ole Miss fans need Texas to jump Florida State. I think that might be the key is for Texas to jump Florida State. I think Texas needs to get into the playoff potentially, and it'd be Georgia, Michigan, Oregon, and Texas, those 4 teams. I think Ole Miss makes the NY6 at that point because Florida State's going to go to the Orange Bowl. Louisville's going to go to whatever secondary bowl they have, and that's going to open up the spot for Ole Miss. Unless the college football rankings and they do what is correct, and that is ranking Ole Miss ahead of Missouri. If they do that, If they can make that move, I think this will be all right. I think Missouri has a chance to a little bit be like TCU was in the playoffs in 2014, to where they ranked down, because one of the second game that we need to talk about is Iowa State beat Kansas State. Kansas State was Missouri's best win. Going into yesterday or Saturday, it was the best win on Missouri's resume. It took a 62-yard field goal to beat them, but it was Missouri's best win. Kansas State, as we all know, was a team that Tulane beat last year. Kansas State is not a particularly good team, and they're kind of an 8-4 type football team, which is where they finished up. At 8-4, Kansas State is going to fall out of the rankings. So that's going to leave Tennessee at about 23 as Missouri's best win. That's not going to match up with Tulane, who still has one game left, and that's still an important game. Tulane needs to win that conference championship game for Ole Miss's resume's sake. And you have LSU, which is not going anywhere, where they're going to be 13, 14, or 15 in that range. So Ole Miss's best win this season is going to be a mid-teens team. And that is something to crow about. And Ole Miss's losses are better than anybody's losses in the country. The only team that comes close is Penn State, who Ole Miss is in competition with a little bit. But with Ohio State, they potentially fall down below Alabama, which means Penn State's two losses would be to Michigan and Ohio State, as opposed to Georgia and Alabama. Penn State and Ole Miss have remarkably similar resumes, and I think the Peach Bowl or the Cotton Bowl would actually love to get a matchup between Penn State and Ole Miss. We'll see exactly how that goes. I would like to see that. And this is important stuff. Like, I'm going to try and reach out to the Locked On Missouri people and do a crossover for later on this week, basically about this, because, you know, a week from yesterday, we'll find out the playoff rankings. As I record this, I would already know. So this week is going to be a lot of talking about how Ole Miss can do what they need to do. When we live stream Tuesday night, because we're planning on live streaming Tuesday night, I'm sure a lot of that reaction is going to be exactly where Ole Miss falls in the rankings. Does Ole Miss move up to 10 or 11? Do they jump Penn State, which I don't think that's possible because all those teams are still winning. It's an interesting situation. I am not the type person that is going to begrudge Tulane, though. The group of five berth, that's the rules. It's no different than James Madison at 10-0 trying to petition to waive the no postseason clause because they're good. Just because Tulane's good, just because Ole Miss beat them doesn't matter. It's within their rules to do what they need to do. So that is really interesting. I'm dead serious that the SEC needs to flex their muscle. Ole Miss is the clear number 3 team in the Southeastern Conference. Everybody that is not a Missouri fan would tell you that, especially the LSU fans. And in the games there, Missouri's resume is getting weaker by the moment. Ole Miss has an opportunity with a landmine. If Tulane can beat SMU, you never root for an injury in that situation, but SMU's quarterback apparently went down last week, and the game is in Yulman Stadium, and we saw that can be a little bit of a cauldron. So Tulane needs to win that game and be basically group of 5 ready to happen, finish 12-1, and Ole Miss will have a 12-win victory on their resume when everything's said and done. And honestly, if you beat a conference champion, I don't care when that is and how that is going, that needs to count for something. It just does. So we're going to talk about that pretty much on repeat throughout the week. We're going to talk basketball. We're going to talk some other stuff, but a lot of the stuff we're going to talk about is going to be this bowl thing, because Ole Miss fans, they want this to be taken right, and they want the committee to be serious right now. And they want them to be real, because the third best team in the SEC right now is clearly Ole Miss. Clearly. Honestly, it's not even particularly close. Let me just spit out the resume one more time. Ole Miss's 2 losses this year are to teams with a combined record of 23-1. Now, we'll go to 24-2 after Saturday. So we'll just say 24-2. Ole Miss has a victory over LSU at home, a team that beat Missouri the very next week at their home. I mean, it's literally an apples to apples comparison. Ole Miss has won and defeated every team they were supposed to beat. Georgia Tech played Georgia just about as well as anybody has this season. Ole Miss beat that team by 20 points. You can't use transitive property when it comes to football. And whenever you do that, whenever you start playing that game, you're going to make mistakes. You're going to do things that honestly are just not in the best interest of what's going on. Still more to come on Locked On Ole Miss, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want a New Year's Six Bowl for Ole Miss fans. But selfishly, that doesn't align with what I personally want. And I'll explain why next. As the weather gets colder, the NFL offers to stay hot on FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. That's $150 if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. Thanks to everybody that followed our graphics and everything as the season went on as well. This app is so easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, it's an official partner of the NFL. Thanks for making Locked On Ole Miss Podcast your first listen of the day, and shout out to the everydayers. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows that cover every league. For your second listen, go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to be the first ever 24/7 stream channel. Be part of history. All right, so this whole show, Ole Miss is clearly the number 3 team in the Southeastern Conference. I don't even know if anybody would argue about that. If you just look at the absolute results and what's going on, Ole Miss is clearly that team. They are those dudes this year. Seriously. And it is honestly time for the SEC to kind of flex their muscles like, hey, we get it. We understand what's going with these metrics. You kind of need to flip those two. You just kind of do. Because as intriguing as an Ole Miss versus Iowa game would be in the Citrus Bowl, and it would be intriguing, it really would. I don't think anybody necessarily wants that, but we'll see exactly what goes. Now, I do want a New Year's Six Bowl for the fans of Ole Miss. Period. The people that are looking for and they're just in this argument and they're ready to go, I want this for them. Because all of the prestige and status and the fact that Ole Miss has been to 4 out of 10 New Year's Six Bowl games since there's been a New Year's Six Bowl. In the last 10 years, they've been 4 times under 2 different coaches. 2 different coaches have taken them each twice. This is not a fluke. This is a cool thing. It would be a major deal for prestige for the university to go. Period. End of story. Also, I will concede that Mizzou is good this year. They are. I just don't think they're as good as Ole Miss. And if there's a situation where they only take 3 SEC teams, I don't think Mizzou is that dude. They're just not. Their best win is over a team with 8 wins. They gave up 24 to Vanderbilt. They also got boat raced by Georgia. The SEC East is garbage this year. It's basically Georgia and then Mizzou beating up on the weak sisters of the poor. That is the SEC East this year. I mean, there's nothing, it just kind of is what it is. But me personally, I live 50 miles from Citrus Bowl Stadium. Okay. And nobody cares where I live, but I'm going to tell you what is going on. If Ole Miss goes to the Citrus Bowl, you are going to have all the media publications coming down for Orlando to cover the game like they would any other bowl game. So the coverage of the Citrus Bowl will not matter at all. So not necessarily ignore it, but just take that as background. Citrus Bowl is on January 1st. Kickoff's at about noon. The game is in the Citrus Bowl. 3 days later, on January 3rd, is the Under Armour All-American game. It's a game that Kamarion Franklin's playing in. Braylon Burnside is announcing his decision at, and I think one or two other Ole Miss players are down there as well. All of the people that are covering a Citrus Bowl would be easily able to go over and cover the Under Armour All-American game. So for Ole Miss fans, coverage and to get more football that we all want to enjoy, the Citrus Bowl would provide that, because this is the way, if Ole Miss goes to an NY6 Bowl game, let's say they go to the Cotton Bowl just for giggles. All of the media potential are going to go to Dallas, and they're going to spend that, and the game is like on the 29th. Now, from that point, you'd have to buy a plane ticket or a drive down or whatever, and you're probably 20 hours worth of driving away to get down to Orlando for the Under Armour game that is going to be about a week later. You can buy a plane ticket, you cannot, but it would require you separating even a little bit more and cause greater expense. You're looking at a little over 2 weeks of expenses for that game. So they just won't cover the Under Armour game, because you'll have people from 24/7 on 3, and those guys will be here. It might not be Ole Miss focused, but there will be people here that will have their eyes on what's going on, and they'll have their list of the top 10 players on day one. That is what the coverage will look like if Ole Miss goes to an Access Bowl. That's not what it'll look like if Ole Miss goes to the Citrus Bowl, because you'll still get the same coverage and everything for the Citrus Bowl. You'll have the game on January 1st, and then you'll be able to move over to the Under Armour All-American game, where stories and coverage will be very specific to Ole Miss and their wants and needs. You'll be hearing about Kamarion Franklin. You'll be hearing about Braylon Burnside. You'll be hearing about those players and what they're doing down in Orlando. Now, I'm going to be there. I've already filed for my credential for that game. So I'm going to be at that one, because if Ole Miss goes to the Cotton Bowl, I'm not going to that one. So I'm putting all my eggs, because most of these places are going to put their eggs in one basket or another. My eggs are going in the Under Armour All-American game. That's been planned for 6 months. And Brian Smith and all of that, we're going to try and figure out a way to do some interesting stuff on remote. Should be a lot of fun as well. But, normally this is the What We Learned episode. What we learned is Ole Miss is the third best team in the Southeastern Conference. They're not 1 or 2, not saying they are, but they are clearly the third, and they are obviously the third. And honestly, they deserve the respect and recognition that comes with being the third team. And it is up for the SEC and the playoff committee and all of them to get this right. I'll be looking tomorrow night at the rankings to see if Ole Miss is within 1 spot of Missouri. Because if Ole Miss is within 1 spot of Missouri after the playoff rankings, I guarantee you that's going to flip. As just the way this works, I've seen it happen, honestly, way too many times. So should be really interesting indeed. Thanks, everyone, for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen. Everydayers Dalen Flowers and Brad Logan are on the menu today as we talk Egg Bowl and New Year's 6. For your second listen, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you, covering 24/7 the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. For your second listen, go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 stream channel. For those of you on YouTube, we'll send you there right now. Anyway, hotty toddy.